3 men, 3 neighborhoods, 3 completely normal lives. One was a businessman who threw parties for his neighbors and drove his kids to school. One was a handyman who helped guests carry their luggage and fixed leaks in their rooms. And one performed as a clown for sick children in hospitals. Between them, they killed at least 70 people, possibly more. They worked. They smiled. They shook hands with police officers. They sat across from investigators and answered every question calmly. And every single time, they were thanked and let go. Because nobody suspected them. Not once. Not ever. Until it was too late. This is the story of 3 serial killers who hid in plain sight. Who lived among us. Who smiled at us. Who we trusted completely. And what their cases reveal about the most terrifying truth in all of true crime. The most dangerous person in any room is never the one you are afraid of. It is always the one you never think to fear. Case 1. Norwood Park Township, Chicago, Illinois. 1970s. If you lived on West Somerdale Avenue during this time, you probably knew your neighbor John Wayne Gacy. He was hard to miss. Loud, gregarious, always laughing, always hosting. He ran a successful construction company called PDM Contractors. He was involved in local politics. He had shaken hands with First Lady Rosalind Carter at a Democratic Party fundraiser and had the photograph to prove it. He kept it framed on his wall. He threw elaborate parties for the neighborhood. Dozens of people. Food. Music. Laughter. And John, right in the middle of it all. The perfect host. The kind of neighbor everyone wanted to have. Friendly. Generous. Dependable. The kind of man you would trust with your children. And many people did. Because John Wayne Gacy had another persona, a character he had created himself, a clown named Pogo. He would dress up in the full costume, white face paint, red nose, colorful outfit, and perform at parades, fundraisers, and children's hospitals. Parents would bring their sick children to see Pogo the clown. Children would laugh and reach out to touch his face. And John Wayne Gacy would smile back at them. The perfect neighbor. The perfect entertainer. The perfect disguise. But underneath that house on West Somerdale Avenue, something else was happening. Something that the neighbors with their barbecues and their laughter and their trust had no idea about. Gacy had a crawl space beneath his home. A low dark area under the floorboards. Damp. Tight. The kind of space most people never think about. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy used it as a graveyard. His victims were young men, teenagers, men in their early 20s. He would lure them to his home with promises of work through his construction company, or meet them at bus depots and offer them a ride. Once inside his house, he would show them what he called a magic trick. He would produce a pair of handcuffs, demonstrate how they worked, and before the young man understood what was happening, the handcuffs were on, and John Wayne Gacy was no longer smiling. He murdered at least 33 young men between 1972 and 1978. He buried 26 of them in the crawl space beneath his house. 3 more were buried elsewhere on the property. His last 4 victims he disposed of in the Des Plaines River because the crawl space had run out of room. He had run out of space for bodies beneath his own house. And still, nobody knew. Stay with me. Because what investigators found when they finally searched the house is something nobody on that street was prepared for. It was the disappearance of a 15-year-old boy named Robert Piest in December 1978 that finally brought investigators to Gacy's door. Pius had told his mother he was going to speak to a contractor about a summer job. He never came home. His mother called police. Police traced the lead to Gacy. They searched his home. And when they got to the crawlspace, the smell alone told them everything. Investigators recovered the remains of 26 young men from beneath John Wayne Gacy's house. Men who had vanished over 6 years. Men whose families had filed missing persons reports. Men who had been written off as runaways. Men who had been right there, beneath the floorboards of a house where neighborhood parties were held, where children came to laugh at Pogo the Clown, where a man shook hands with the First Lady and kept the photograph on his wall. Gacy was arrested on December 21, 1978. In 1980, he was convicted of 33 murders, the most of any serial killer in American history at that time. He was sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row painting clown portraits and giving interviews in which he maintained his innocence. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. His last words were two. He said, "Kiss my ass." And then he was gone. But the question that haunted everyone who had known him remained. How did nobody see it? For 6 years. How did nobody see it? If you are new here, NightTrace goes deep into the darkest true stories that most channels are afraid to touch. Hit subscribe so you never miss what we pull out of the darkness next. We still have 2 more killers to get through, and I promise you, they are just as disturbing as John Wayne Gacy. Maybe more. Case 2. Westfield, Indiana. 1990s. If you lived near Fox Hollow Farm during this time, you probably knew Herbert. Herbert Baumeister, a successful businessman, owner of a chain of thrift stores called Save-A-Lot, a husband, a father of 3 children, a man who lived on an 18-acre property with a swimming pool and a large main house and woods stretching behind it for acres in every direction. Herbert Baumeister was the kind of man who looked like he had everything figured out. The business, the family, the property, the respectability. He drove his children to school. He attended community events. He was not the kind of man anyone looked at twice. Not the kind of man anyone worried about. Not the kind of man anyone suspected of anything at all. But while his family was away on summer vacations, Herbert Baumeister was hunting, picking up young men from bars in Indianapolis, bringing them back to Fox Hollow Farm, to the swimming pool, to the woods behind the house. And when those men left Fox Hollow Farm, they left as bone fragments scattered across 18 acres of Indiana woodland, while his children played, while his wife gardened, while his neighbors waved from their driveways. In 1994, Baumeister's 13-year-old son found a human skull in the woods behind their house while playing. His father told him it was a medical specimen, that it had belonged to his grandfather who was a doctor. The boy believed him. His wife believed him. And life at Fox Hollow Farm continued normally. For 2 more years, while more bone fragments joined the ones already scattered through those woods. When investigators finally searched the property in July 1996, they found over 10,000 human bone fragments scattered across the 18 acres, the remains of at least 25 people. Men who had vanished from Indianapolis throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Men whose families had filed missing persons reports that went nowhere. Men who had been written off. Men who had been right there, in the woods behind a family home, while birthday parties were held, while children did their homework, while a man went to his thrift stores every morning and came home every evening and nobody asked a single question. When Baumeister learned that investigators had searched his property, he drove north, across the border into Canada. into the wilderness of Ontario. And on July 3rd, 1996, his body was found in Pinery Provincial Park, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Dead. Every answer, every name, every confession, gone with him. To this day, most of his victims have never been identified, and the full number of people he killed may never be known. Case 3. Cedar Lodge Motel, 8 miles from Yosemite National Park, California, 1999. If you stayed at Cedar Lodge during this time, you probably met Cary. Cary Stayner, the handyman. Quiet, friendly, always around, always willing to help. He would carry your luggage, fix your leaks, smile at you in the corridor. The kind of employee you appreciated. The kind of man you felt safe around. Cary Stayner had worked at Cedar Lodge for years. He knew the property inside out. He knew the guests. He knew the routines. He knew which rooms were occupied and which were empty. And he knew that on February 15th, 1999, Room 509 contained a mother named Carol Sund, her 15-year-old daughter Julie, and a 16-year-old exchange student from Argentina named Silvina Pelosso. 3 people who had spent the day hiking in Yosemite. 3 people who had no reason to be afraid. 3 people who had no idea what was coming. He knocked on their door, told them he needed to fix a leak. They let him in. By the next morning, all 3 of them were gone. And Cary Stayner went to work the next day, carried luggage, fixed things, smiled at guests, while the FBI launched one of the largest missing persons investigations in California history, and interviewed him twice, and let him go. Both times. 1 month after the disappearance, a burned rental car was found on a remote road. In the trunk, 2 bodies, Carol Sund and Silvina Pelosso. But Julie, the 15-year-old, was not there. And then investigators received an anonymous note, with a hand-drawn map, and 4 words at the top that nobody who worked that case has ever forgotten. It said, "We had fun with this one." The map led to Julie's body in a remote forest. 5 months later, a 26-year-old naturalist named Joa Armstrong was found murdered near her cabin inside Yosemite National Park. A witness had seen a vehicle near her cabin. Investigators traced it. It belonged to Cary Stayner. They found him, detained him, searched his truck, and let him go again. The next day he disappeared. When they finally brought him in for a full interrogation, he confessed to all 4 murders. 4 women. 4 lives. Ended by the man who carried luggage and fixed leaks and smiled at guests in the corridor. Cary Stayner was convicted of all 4 murders. He is currently on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California. Still alive. Still waiting. Over 25 years later. And the FBI agents who interviewed him twice and let him go have never fully explained how they missed it. How they sat across from a man who had murdered 3 women, looked him in the eyes, and saw nothing. Because there was nothing to see. That was the point. That was always the point. If this is hitting different, it should. Subscribe to NightTrace so you never miss what we find in the darkness next. Because what I am about to tell you in the final section of this video is the most disturbing part of all 3 of these stories, and most channels never talk about it. If you made it this far into the dark with NightTrace, you already know you see the world differently from most people. Subscribe so you never miss what we pull out of the darkness next, because the next story is already waiting, and it is darker than this one.